Hi, this is Jack Downs. I'm giving you a little rundown of what we did in class today in JOU 308 on February 15th. This was mostly a lecture class. Began with, of course, I went over this daily schedule, and of course you should do that also, just to see what's due and expected and so on. The only topic we covered though was interviewing. And I tried to give you, I know that's a topic which is covered over and over again in different classes, but I think I gave some additional information that might be somewhat helpful. We'll see. I did give a handout which I will send to you, and this is what it looked like. It was essentially some questions to pay attention to as we went through the presentation. We did not complete it all. We covered, I think, everything except for the last question. Yeah. And so this presentation will be completed next class probably. I began by a general discussion about anxiety and interviewing, about how when you feel anxious about doing interviews, or about how you feel more comfortable doing interviews, how you can deal with it with anxiety. And I asked students for their own suggestions and so on, and I had quite a good number of them, a lot of good suggestions. Which we talked about. And some of them I have on this next slide. And you can probably come up with some of your own, of course. Many people suggested, of course, to be prepared. And that, of course, is very important. So dealing with interview anxiety. And by the way, I'll give you a copy of this presentation too. I suggest the idea of playing the role of the reporter. It's kind of like acting. It's kind of like wearing some armor, especially if you're an introverted person, which will protect you in a sometimes anxiety-causing situation. I think dressing for the interview can help you get into the role, just like actors wear certain clothes in their performance, right? I think identifying yourself as a student journalist, saying that out loud, convincing yourself too that you are a journalist, that can be useful. If nothing else, do know that you do need to identify yourself clearly to people who you're interviewing, and actually make sure they know what the heck you're doing. You are taking notes for something, for writing a story. Here's a suggestion I found from some other source which sounded interesting to me. Imagine yourself older. I can tell you personally that as you get older, as you become an old fogey like me, you are not as embarrassed by as many things. And I do remember when I was in my 20s, I was more easily embarrassed. It's not like you don't care. It's just people don't have that power over you anymore. So why don't you imagine yourself older? Maybe that could help. Maybe not, but it's worth a try. Know that interviewing does get easier with practice. Some interviews are easier than others, of course, anyway. But it's a muscle that you have to exercise, and you get better at it. I think. In fact, we had the suggestion in class, the idea of starting with small talk, about just being personable, about chatting. That's all great. At least you can start that idea by being very polite and nice. You make people want to help you, or be less likely that they'll be hostile. You smile, you do your best, and you know that you can at least you can even like throw yourself on their mercy and ask for help. Like, I just don't understand this. I need your help. We'll get to it in a minute, but unlike print reporters, unlike broadcast reporters, there's no camera rolling to show the embarrassing things we're doing, asking for help like that, or being dumb about things. But that's okay. But of course, being prepared, it can be very helpful. It can make you feel more confident, and you should always be prepared. Knowledge is a weapon or a shield against anxiety. And I don't know what happened to the rest of my sentence there. I haven't bothered to go back and fix it. I just noticed it during today's class, but you get the idea. Okay, so I talked about that. Oh, I showed this slide. This is something that Sean Murphy used in teaching this class. It just points out the two most common failings of interviews. One of them is you're not prepared. So how long have you been translating the Dead Sea Scrolls? That information is the packet we sent you. In other words, you should have been prepared. You should have done your homework ahead of time. You should have looked up basic information about this. And the reporter says, oh, I meant to have a look at that. And then the interviewee says, I shot my mother last night. And the reporter says, "So what did the scroll say?" In other words, he's not listening. The reporter is not listening. He or she is not listening. So be prepared and listen. If you could do just two things, that would be it. Those would be it. But there's more you can do too, and more useful information. I played this video, and I'll send you a link to it, from Natasha Alford. In fact, I played it and I interrupted a number of times with more tidbits, which is going to make this presentation for you now not so interesting, because I'm just going to tell you to go watch this video, and which I think is excellent. It got a lot of fantastic information. And now I'm going to have to tell you separately some of the information I added in. She talks about her tips, and before she really gets into the tips, she talks about her personal experience in these stories that she did, a lot of stories about race and especially in issues in Puerto Rico. And that's something that she's passionate about. And that's suggests to me a suggestion for you, that you ideally should come up with story ideas that interest you, because this will probably increase your confidence in the interviews, and it'll make your job more fun because you're interested in the topic, or you've got an affinity to the topic or to the people. So when you're pitching stories for yourself, think about stories that interest you, and don't stick yourself with stories that you think are boring. In other words, occasionally it happens. You might get assigned stories in a newsroom that you're just not crazy about. But most stories, if you can generate your own story ideas all the time for your editors, then there's less opportunity they have to suggest stories to you that are terrible. And she goes through a bunch of ways to improve your tips that she has. And of course, one of the things she talks about is the preparation you do. And I wanted to suggest, and this kind of answers one of the questions in that other handout, that you can kind of online stock your interview subjects. You should treat it kind of like going on a date with someone you don't really know, the first date with someone you don't really know much about at all, right? Would you just want to open that door and see them for the first time and not really know much about them at all? Wouldn't you, talk to friends who know that person, or go online and Google them and see what they're posting on social media and so on. Do the same thing for people you're going to interview. Treat it like a date you're going to have, and you are trying to get as much information on them as you can to be prepared. Personal information too. You also want to see what they've written, what's been written about them, if they've been interviewed before. So you essentially be a stalker, and find everything you can about them. Maybe they wrote a blog. Maybe it's old now. Maybe it's still online, and who knows what you'll turn up. So then I continued this video from Natasha, and she goes through her 4 major tips for interviews, which are very important. And then as she steps into one of her last suggestions, is the idea of listening for quotes. That's a really important thing too. So I'll let you learn all that from the video. And then from that, you also get her suggestions in general. But then we have to realize that everything we're talking about and she's talking about really pertains mostly to in-person interviews, right? But will you do all your interviews in person? Well, nobody does all their interviews that way, probably. If you can, that'd be great. In-person interviews are the gold standard. That's what you want to do. You want to ideally meet someone someplace they're comfortable and spend time with them. And then ideally, it becomes more of a conversation too. And then things will come up that you weren't expecting, which is good too. But what if you can't do an in-person interview with them? Well, then, of course, your next choice should be something like Zoom or other video conferencing, where you can see them and talk to them. It's not as a perfect solution, but it's better than the third choice, which is just have a phone conversation. But sometimes you have to do that, and that's okay. It takes a little more work to really get any personality out of someone on a phone conversation, but you can do your best. However, any of those choices are better than something you should avoid, which is doing interviews via email or social media or other messaging services, Facebook Messenger or something like that. If you want to use email after the fact to follow up and just make sure you have a fact right or something, sure, that's okay. But otherwise, you don't do interviews in email. You don't know who's really answering, or other messaging services or things. You want to make sure you get a real genuine personal answer, which is the sort of thing you get in person, or if you have to, Zoom or phone call, but not email or social media or messaging. She continues and talks about the idea of listening for quotes and what quotes, what you're looking for in the quotes that you use. It's a really important topic. And I broke away to say, think about you kind of have 3 buckets of stuff for your story. After you've done all your interviews, you've gathered all the information that you need, right? You have 3 buckets of stuff. You've got one bucket, which is just as background information, facts that don't need attribution, narrative, transitions. That's most of your story as far as content-wise, the amount-wise. Then you've got another bucket, which is paraphrases. Those are other things that are said. We say the person said, but they're not using their direct words, right? Paraphrase or indirect quotations. That's another chunk of your story, probably not as much as large as the other one, but it's bigger than the third chunk, the third bucket you dip into and pull out of, which are direct quotes. We only directly quote things that are show emotion or humanity or personality, or they and them choosing those words exactly is what's important. The way they say it matters. So that's definitely a much smaller portion of our story. How much is it? Is it 10%? Is it 20%? It may not be 20%, but it's a smaller portion of the story. So then I finished up, and you can finish up the video also, or you will have already by this time. And I moved on to some more tips and so on. One of the things I talked about is you'll see Natasha from her video is very polished, and she's used to doing a lot of video reporting too. We can be glad though that we are not doing broadcast reporting or being filmed during our interviews in this class, or lots of reporters are not. And that's because it's good, because those broadcast people or other people who are being filmed all the time in their interviews, they have to look good, they have to sound like they always know what they're talking about, they have to always sound like they're perfectly organized and get things right. Their audio has to be good. But for you and me, remember, there is no camera filming us. We do our best. Sometimes we make mistakes. Sometimes we actually didn't prepare for something we thought we didn't need to prepare for. Sometimes we have to just say, hey, I don't get it. I don't understand. Sometimes we either intentionally or unintentionally act dumb, act naive. And that's okay. It's okay to make mistakes in your interviews. It's okay to be human. It's okay to say you're sorry, to try to fix it up. And those things do make you more human, and they can actually sometimes get you better results too. So don't be afraid to be human, and realize that humans make mistakes. Here's some other tips, some other questions. One of the questions was, and I'll go back to the presentation here, is the question about should you record your interviews? And I think the general trend these days is to say everyone should take notes during the interviews. However, you probably will do some recording also. Do remember though, although the recording is a useful backup to review later, and it is especially important if you're not going to use the information for a long time, to have a recording that you can go back to. And it's especially important when you're handling difficult, controversial information, and you may have to prove to somebody that's what they really said, right? Because you have that recorded record. But recording can get in the way. It can increase the reluctance of a source to speak to you. You do need to tell people that you are recording. Regardless of the legality of it, it is ethically correct that you have to do that. Tell them that you're going to record. If they say no, well, then you probably want to talk about it. Why? That would be an interesting question. But in any case, remember that if you relied only on recording, you may end up in trouble. Things happen to recordings. You think you're recording and you're not. The file is lost. The device is damaged, so on. So always get good notes also. And do remember as a con, also the idea that Working from a recording can take more time. First of all, just repeatedly reviewing it to find the thing you want, that takes time, as opposed to getting it right in your notes to begin with. And also, actually making a full transcript from a recording can take a lot of time. There are tools you can use these days, like otter.ai, which you should look up, and you can get some free transcription made from, you get a certain number of free trial recordings transcribed there. So there's ways to use that service. But in general, recordings can add to the time it takes to do things. What else? I talked about taking notes. You really want to take excellent notes, of course, but it's really tough because people speak at about 2 to 3 times the rate you can write normally. If you ever have the opportunity to actually learn shorthand, that's a great thing to do. But you probably don't. So you develop your own shorthand, right? You abbreviate names, you skip lots of letters, like little short words like a or the or in or and or so on. You have other abbreviations that you use. And then also you listen for the quotes that you really want. And when you get to them, you make them repeat them, you say them back to them, you slow things down, and you get them right. You do your best to keep your eye contact while you're writing in your notebook, of course. It's not easy. It takes practice. You don't want that notebook to be obtrusive, so it's probably not a big notebook. It's a smaller notebook, like a steno notebook, or even an actual reporter notebook, which is very small, can fit in your pocket. And then right after the interview, you go over your notes and either rewrite them or add to them and make them clear. Maybe your handwriting is not that great, especially when you're trying to take notes while you're trying to keep eye contact and listen at the same time. It's a lot to do. So you go back and you straighten up your notes, clean up your notes right away. Do remember to get the names right, names and titles. And I've suggested this before, but I'll say again, write the name out, have them spell it out to you, spell it back to them, even show it to them to make sure you get it right. Names, titles, addresses, those things are there's no excuse for getting them wrong, and it's very embarrassing when they are wrong. And then finally, not really finally, but getting nearer the end, make sure that you really do a good job identifying yourself. You say you're a student journalist, explain what you're doing, especially when it's somebody who's not used to working with the media very much. You gotta make sure that they're not going to be surprised that you're actually taking notes, or that they don't get it. And for our classwork, maybe it's not that important, but in general, it's a good practice to get into to make sure that they really understand you are taking notes because you're going to write a story. And then let's imagine the interview is over. I have 3 things I always suggest to people they should do. 3 things they should do. I would say ask, who else should I talk to about this topic? Ask for other sources. You might be surprised. Sometimes the people you interview are the best sources for other sources. Also, you may ask, is there anything that I didn't ask about that you want to bring up? I like that kind of open-ended question at the end. Just open the door wide open. Most of the time, you'll get nothing out of it. But once in a while, you get something surprising. Maybe it's a completely different story you get. And then finally, make sure to ask for their contact information. You need it for your stories that you're going to submit to class. I want their contact information. But also, you need it because you need to let them know that you may be back in touch if you have any questions when you're writing it. So you tell them that. Say, I'll be back in touch. How should I get back? How should I get a hold of you if I have any questions while I'm writing a story? Because you open that door for yourself to say, I got to remember, if I'm confused at all, I got to get back in touch. So you get that source down. And then, really close to finally, I talked about difficult interviews, and I showed another video, this one here, which is I think it's a New York Daily News. Is it New York Daily News or New York Post reporter? I forget now. I think he's an education reporter now, but I think he was mostly talking about his time as a general assignment reporter and having very difficult interviews, very emotional situations. My suggestions are, when you're trying to interview someone but they're angry, and first of all, do know that I don't think you run into any of these problems in your classwork here. but you may in student publications or out in the real world. Sometimes there are difficult things. Sometimes you have people who are angry or very emotional or going through a very difficult thing, a very emotional thing. So you have to deal with these situations. First of all, you don't want to be in danger, so you don't enter those situations if you feel like you're going to be in danger. But sometimes they're difficult to avoid. When someone is angry, I would tend to let them just try to talk it out. Let them go for a while. Hope that they settle down. And when they start to say, okay, now can we get back to this? You can also try to, whenever anyone is angry or emotional, you can try to offer them kind of concrete things to talk about. Try to bring the conversation back to the normal world, the normal daily life things, and then try to go back into the topic. But there are very emotional situations, like what if you're talking to someone whose son just committed suicide or something, or someone who's been gravely injured in an accident and is paralyzed now, and they want to, and talking to them about what they went through. Someone who's a son whose father is chronically ill, like with maybe dementia or something like that. These are very difficult things. First of all, you may ask yourself, why would people in these situations ever want to talk to me anyway? But I think you'd be thinking about it the wrong way. I always tell students that people can always say no. Yes, they can always say no, but you need to ask if they want to talk to you. Because don't think about an interview in someone's who's had some major problem or is facing a major situation. Don't think about that as you trying to take something away from them. Think about it as if you're offering them something, because you are. You're offering them giving them the opportunity to get their message out, to help others, maybe to inform their community about what they're going through. Sometimes people can find it very therapeutic and helpful to talk to a reporter and describe things to them. So you offer, they say no. Okay, you say, hey, you feel better, you want to talk about it later, here's my information, here's my contact information, or give me a business card, or just jot down your email, your phone number, and hand it to them or something, right? And then maybe they'll get back in touch with you. But you'd be surprised that people in very difficult situations sometimes will talk and actually will find it useful to talk to you. And again, they can always say no. And again, how do you get that kind of interview rolling? It's not easy, but you try to gain their trust. You try to get them to open up. And I suggest you start with some concrete, as I said, down-to-earth, daily life kind of things as you get going. And of course, if you're doing an interview where you think it's going to become difficult later on, you'll save the hardest things for the end. Oh, excuse me. Sorry for the interruption. Okay. So then I played that. So I talked about difficult interviews and played that other link that's here that I will send you in my email. I think that was about all we did. And there is a little bit more of the presentation you will see from the file that I send you, but I will be continuing that probably our next class. So that was about it, what we did today, and we'll see you in class next week.